Help MythVision keep bringing you material by becoming a Patreon member, as well as PayPal. Like, share, subscribe, and comment. Join the Patreon to get early access to videos and check out the website.
Go ahead, get the book. Come on, subscribe to his podcast.
We are MythVision. Welcome back to the show, guys. Derek Lambert here with two of the most fun-loving, exciting guys who are going to explore early Mormon history with you. Joseph Smith. Guys, I know that you've watched this far and said, damn, I never knew this. I didn't understand this. Trust me, I'm in your shoes. Like, if you guys could see my face half the time, these guys are seeing what I look like when you guys can't see it. I'm blown away. The information they're discussing here. We have skeptics. They're critical thinkers. They're people who are looking at this from an angle that a Mormon who's a Mormon historian will never explore in this type of way. They'll never say, a spade is a spade, and this is what it is. Okay. Of course, it's a biased angle. I'm not trying to trash talk. Trust me, you guys know that watching MythVision, but you're never going to hear anything like this. And that's why I'm asking you guys to help my guest. All right. Bryce Blankenagle has a show, Naked Mormonism podcast. Sorry, I'm over here having brain farts here, but he doesn't just do these podcasts. He does them naked. Okay, I've been saying this. You guys don't understand how special that is. It brings value to the content. But he does have a Patreon, guys. I'm asking people watching the show to please go and help support his Patreon. Join. It's a few bucks a month, like a cup of coffee. You guys can join and help him do what he's doing. It not only reflects good on MythVision.
I just want to quickly add, there's a bit of an incentive right now because for my patrons, patreon.com/nakedmormonism, I'm currently on hiatus, so I'm not charging my patrons for anything. So joining my Patreon is free until I'm off of hiatus. And then, $1 an episode is, a coffee a month, right? But on the Patreon feed, I do extended editions of most of the episodes. I have audiobooks that I read with my commentary. So there are literally hundreds of hours of extra content that you can get on free right now until hiatus is over. So it'd break my heart if you wanted to join now, and then when I start charging you, you quit. But there's a plethora of free available extra information there right now. Patreon.com/nakedmormonism. So
yes, please, guys, I'm asking you nicely. I always plug my own stuff. I'm shameless when it comes to plugging for anybody or myself, but I just say that to say, like, that's why he can keep doing what he's doing, right? You guys help support what these guys are doing. Also, David Fitzgerald. When I went to start the show, I want to give you guys a little secret behind the scenes. I said, Bryce, would you like to come and do a series of episodes? And he's like, who is this guy? And then David's name came up and he's like, sure, I would love to do an episode. And I was like, I don't blame you. David Fitzgerald is the author of The Complete Heretic's Guide. Ugh, something just popped up. Hold on. What just happened? Just deleted it.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion and the Mormons. Guys, go down in the description. I'm asking you guys, get the book. It's on ebook. How much is it on ebook? It's like a few bucks. It's not even
cheap. It's so ridiculous. $6.66, I believe, as a Kindle book.
You did that on purpose.
Oh, that's so good.
Ooh.
The book is worth a read. Totally worth a read.
Dude,
Absolutely.
You're gonna gain more knowledge since you paid that much to get the book. It's just the secret. You have to have wisdom to calculate the book, so you have to figure this out. He also has a Patreon, guys. Go support his Patreon. It's new, so he doesn't really know the ins and outs quite yet, but he will figure them out. Go support what he does. Support both of these guys. You don't want to miss this episode. What episode are we doing today? Are we going to get into the polygamy, or are we going to talk about the theology? Which should come first, the chicken or the egg in the scenario?
Sex.
So we have this chat among the three of us going on behind the scenes, obviously, and we've been kind of toying around with exactly how to handle this stuff, because this has all been Mormon history with almost no theology, right? We've talked a little bit about the Book of Mormon and kind of the premise of it, the, you know, Israelites that came over to America on boats and submarines and whatever. But we haven't like really discussed the deeper inner workings of Mormon theology and polygamy yet. We've just kind of toyed around with stories within those concepts. So I think it would be a good idea to take a step back from the history that we're doing and spend this episode today on the theology, because the theology is vast and expansive, and it also incorporates polygamy. And that is going to be the precursor for our next episode, where we're going to explore the inner workings of polygamy and kind of how it figures into the theology, but more practically what it actually looks like, which is going to be all of the dark and nasty and ugly stories that everybody wants to hear about and wants to learn, and that leads people to call Joseph Smith a rapist and a pedophile. So I think so let's talk about the theology, right? Let's try and break into this system of theology and what Joseph Smith envisioned for his church and for his religion, and more importantly for the entire world. And then we can kind of use that as a branch off point to discuss how polygamy figures into all of this, and how polygamy basically creates the foundations for the Adam God doctrine, where Adam is literally the God that populated the planet. So there's, needless to say, these two episodes, they're not going to be as much history. They're going to be a lot more on the theology, but I promise we're going to do our best to try and kind of make it fun at the same time.
Quick side note, very fun, very sexy.
I love that. How do you start something like this? Because I think it's, maybe I can start with something and you guys just run with it, because I know you can go so many ways. I know you have plenty to talk about. Christianity, right, comes from this Christianity, but it merges with strange magic things and all this stuff that's going on in the 1820s and 30s in this strange burnover town in New York where all this crap happens. What you have is a Jesus Christianity cult, just like any other one, that does something weird, and it literally like evolves into its own species. What happens? Because you talked about how I was like, look, what are they preaching from the pulpits? I said, like, and you're like, well, pretty much a Trinitarian Christian message that's well known and established among the masses, but there's stuff lurking behind the scenes. It's almost like the initiates only know what's really going on. And you're going to get into some of these doctrines that end up becoming more mainstream Mormon doctrine, or at least for those who become Mormons, into finding out. So where do we even begin?
If we want to try and understand Mormon theology, we kind of got to start at the ground level, and that's the Book of Mormon, right? That's where this all kind of started, right? And it's a Christian religion, so everything that happens is within the context of Christianity. So the Book of Mormon was written in order to Christianize the Native Americans, to get them to convert, to become civilized, to become assimilated into the European expansionist worldview. And that's right on the introduction page of the Book of Mormon. It is written for the Native Americans. But this goes to a larger point of what Joseph Smith really wanted to accomplish. And this is no secret. This is exactly what he wanted to do from the very beginning, is he wanted to convert all of the natives to Mormonism and band them together with the freed slaves and march them all across America and burn every settlement that didn't convert to Mormonism. He was the Mormon Muhammad, and he reveled in that nickname. He loved that nickname.
It seems noble, right? That seems noble. That whole idea of helping because nobody cared about it wasn't a very well-known thing to care about the Native Americans, but it delves into their theology. So that seems noble. But what history keeps showing is like, this is like a bad thing.
It's also really white supremacist, right? Because you're writing a history for these people and giving it to them and saying, here, I am saving you from your wretched, sinful state by giving you your Christian history of your people.
And that you used to be white, and then you became sinful, and now you're what you are. But if you keep marrying Mormon missionaries, soon you'll be white and delightsome again. So,
wow.
It's super radical.
And also like this, this isn't just like some kind of fun, wacky, like, oh, hey, it's a white supremacist theology, just like most theologies. Ha ha ha, funny. Like the Mormon Church was running an Indian re-education program until 1996, right? It's called the Indian Placement Program, where it sought to pluck Native children from reservations and put them in the households of white Mormons in order to assimilate them, to continue to erase their culture and their history.
One thing I wanted to say, someone commented on this and they said, I'm so sad that you guys are disgraced. You hate your own white race so much. They said something like this because you made a comment like that. And I'm like, I love myself. I'm glad I'm who I am and where I am. In fact, we can make a change to make all who bleed red the same. Yeah, we all bleed red. And so, yeah, I just think it's that they're misunderstanding you because you're talking about white supremacy ideas or the concepts that white is better. That's bull. Okay, that's the problem right there. And if you have a problem with saying white is better, okay, then hey, you probably have racism tendencies in your ideology. So anyway, I just want to make that comment because we saw a comment on the video. Sorry, David.
No. You couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, like I'm not a self-loathing white person, right? Like I'm just I'm a white guy who recognizes that racism is the very foundations and underpinnings of much of the society we see around us, right? And to ignore that history, to ignore that past, and to ignore the theologies that allowed that to propagate really is a dangerous mistake. And that, that is what leads us to put up Confederate monuments in the 1960s and 70s, right? Like we need to recognize where these tendencies come from. We need to recognize how they result and how they manifest. And Joseph Smith was a vicious white supremacist. Absolutely, and it's not just white supremacist, it's also religious supremacy. Mormonism is the PhD Christianity. Everybody else is on elementary level. It is everything that Christianity is flummoxed by, everything that you don't have an answer for, or that theologians have been debating for centuries. Mormonism has an answer. It has a rock solid answer that you can go to.
And it's all Victorian white trash level bumper sticker theology. And it makes a whole book out of that. Yeah.
It's back of the horse carriage bumper sticker theology.
Every crackpot theory that was floating around that managed to worm its way into the Book of Mormon. Elephants? Right. Yeah, there were elephants in the New World. The Book of Mormon talks about them. They're mastodons, but every latest scientific discovery that was going on, they quickly shoehorned into their book.
Yeah, that's the problem. All these religions I seem to have their cosmology is flat Earth, the Bible, the cosmology in the Quran, all these things, and then they go, well, you're misunderstanding. Now you got to spiritualize or change what it means.
And I can't wait till we get to Mormon cosmology this episode because it is.
So, well, let's just say it. So, like the Book of Mormon, right? Like that lays the foundation work, but there's also a bunch of stuff in there that isn't consistent with broader Mormon theology that has just kind of been ignored or like edited or like rewritten, whatever. So it's like the Book of Mormon initially is a universalist Trinitarian text. All people are saved. All people come unto Christ. Christ is God, is the Holy Ghost, is, it's this Trinitarian concept, this Trinitarian book, but that is not Mormon theology. Because that thing was written in 1829, right? But Joseph Smith's ministry started in 1830. When you're a minister, like you got to come up with cooler and cooler stuff and more interesting, charismatic stuff for people to keep their interest, right? To keep them from going to the next charismatic leader in the next town over, right? So Joseph Smith was constantly amping up the ante. So in 1832, I believe it is, he comes out with, he's constantly writing these revelations, lots of revelations. They become the Doctrine and Covenants. So he writes one of his quintessential revelations, and this is Doctrine and Covenants section 76. And this is where he describes what Mormons today call the plan of happiness or the plan of salvation. This is the Mormon POS. And the plan of salvation in and of itself is a fascinating thing. And I'm going to share my screen, and we got to spend a little bit of time on this thing because it is just fantastic. So viewers can now see what we're looking at. This is the plan of salvation or the plan of happiness.
It's really quite simple.
It's very simple. It's very easy. It's very easy to understand. And well, this is a little foreign to people who don't know anything about Mormonism or who haven't taken any discussions from missionaries. But this is oftentimes the first lesson that missionaries will teach you is the plan of happiness, the plan of salvation. And this basically describes our mortal state and how we came into existence. But there's obviously, unfortunately, a lot of details missing because it's a simplistic diagram trying to explain a vast and complicated theology. But essentially, we all start out in this massive family of spirit babies, right? We're all spirit children. And we're all brothers and sisters in this. And we all got a daddy and a mommy and a mommy and a mommy and a mommy and a mommy.
Yes, and all those mommies and daddies in the spirit world were having spirit sex, and that led to spirit pregnancies, and we were all spiritly born there.
Yes, right. And that constitutes the premortal existence. We are all these spirits, and what these spirits actually are is essentially just organized matter, organized energy, right? So we all existed in some spiritual form prior to being birthed, but it's kind of like we were disorganized celestial material. And it took the act of gods having sex to organize us into human spirits. And once that happens, we get we come into existence. We begin to exist as a constituted spirit. And that is in the premortal existence, right? So we have our father, Elohim, and we have our mothers. We don't know how many celestial mothers we have because, well, it hasn't been revealed to us. We have to wait until we die to ask those questions, which is a common refrain when asking, diving deeper into these concepts. But so this constitutes our spirit family, right? So part of our family are Jesus and Lucifer. They're bros. We're all bros with Jesus and Lucifer. Yeah. And these guys had two different plans. David, you want to take us away from there?
Yeah, and if you've ever seen the beautiful cartoon from the God Makers, it shows the story so well. But basically, good Jesus, who is the bearded, wants to give people free will. But evil Lucifer, with his bushy red hair and spikiness, says, no, we want to make them just automatically obey us. And needless to say, Lucifer loses out, gets mad, convinces a third of the angels in heaven, or the third of the spirits in heaven, the gods in heaven, to go with him, and they all became the devil and demons. Just like that. Boom.
Let's also point out, right? So that created like the first schism in heaven, right? And those are the spirits that went down to outer darkness with the devil. Right. But there were people who weren't sure whether or not they should go with Jesus's plan or with Lucifer's plan, and they were called fence sitters. Also
taking
known
notes,
as,
guys. By the way, I'm taking notes. Sorry.
Also known as black people. Black people were called fence sitters.
Being on the fence is you'll be cursed by being non-white. So all those other
and also one of the prophets, David O'Mackey, I believe it was, made the assertion that people with disabilities were also fence sitters. That they are suffering for the sin of not deciding to go with Jesus fast enough, and that's their mortal
prior to coming into the
their
world.
curse.
Yeah. Ironically,
that's crazy.
In Eastern religions that teach reincarnation, you find that same belief. And I always, you kind of like the idea of reincarnation until you see how it plays out in real life. And if they have like some severely retarded person there, or developmentally disabled in some horrible birth defect, they're like, oh, don't be nice to him. He must have been Hitler in a past life. It's like, wow, talk about victim blaming. It's really messed up.
Yeah, and Mormonism does have this caste system, right? And like the same people who were called to leadership, it's their families, in Joseph Smith's day, it's their families who are running the church today. It's very nepotistic because it's that concept of like the called and elected families. You have the royal Mormon blood, therefore you are more righteous. So that caste system absolutely plays into Mormonism. It's not a meritocracy that it purports to be. So continuing on
about that when we get into the polygamy system as well, because
certainly, absolutely.
definitely different systems of polygamy for the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah. So there's a schism, this war in heaven. This is the first war in heaven that Satan broke off, and he was banished, or he created outer darkness. And we can see this right down here. We don't know much about this. We don't talk much about this, but this is the dark, scary place. So the people who chose to go with Jesus' plan, they basically selected the families that they would be members of, and these are the terrestrial families, the physical mortal families that they would be called to, that they would be born into on Earth. So you choose your family, which, like, there's a lot that goes into that as well. It's like, oh, well, you're being abused by your dad. Well, you chose the wrong family in the premortal existence. Or like, you were strong enough and faithful enough in God's plan that he knew it would be safe to send you to this abusive family because you were strong enough in your faith to retain belief even through that abusive system, right? So it's a very, very disturbing kind of how it plays out.
Way to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. But everybody passes through this veil of forgetfulness on your way to Earth. And this is when you are born, you're crying, you're a little baby, cut the umbilical cord, and then you grow up and you do what you do in your human stuff, and you live, and you're a nice person, you're a mean person, you're a hero, you're a villain, whatever, right? It doesn't really matter. But what happens at your death is actually really interesting, because your spirit and body, through the veil of forgetfulness, are united. That's when your spirit and your body come together, is when you are born. But they are dissolved. The tie between those things is dissolved at death. And that is where your body goes to the physical grave, and your spirit goes to either spirit paradise or spirit prison. This is not heaven and hell. This is essentially a Mormon purgatory awaiting judgment. Yeah. And judgment happens for everybody all at once, by the way, sort of. But it's like Judgment Day is when people are determined that they go to the various kingdoms. But prior to that, basically everybody is living in the spirit prison or the spirit paradise. And to visualize what this actually looks like, go to any seminary or any church on Sunday, and you get to see what this is, because the people who are righteous in life, they go to the spirit paradise, and the people who are not righteous in life, they go to the spirit prison. And the entire eternity spent in this little world of spirit paradise and prison is the people who are paradisiacal are instructing those in the prison on the righteousness and on the gospel, right? So it is purgatory is a Mormon education camp, essentially, where the righteous are the ones running it, the unrighteous are the prisoners.
Yeah, that sounds like fun for thousands.
Great. A lot of fun.
It seems like there's almost like a split from Protestantism here, and kind of refers back somewhat to a Catholicism idea of purgatory here. So they're like, well, we think kind of like where Joseph Smith's original vision mythologized account, where, Lord, should I become a Protestant or a Catholic? They're all wrong. Oh, well, some of the things they say, yeah, let me find things from both and then throw away the rest, so
punk Scientology, that's Mormonism.
Yeah, totally. And that's kind of like, that's every religion, right? Every religion doesn't just crop up out of nowhere, right? Mm-hmm. They're just pulling elements and thoughts and ideas and philosophies from the ether around them. And that's very, very much what Joseph Smith did. And also, these concepts aren't exactly new, right? Like, Joseph Smith may have applied his own words and his own labels to these concepts, but this idea of like a universal salvation that is pregnant within this system that's universalism, right? Like, his dad was a universalist, his uncle was a universalist at the time, and that's not the same universalists as like Unitarian Universalists today, who are atheist church. That was universalism as in all people universally are saved. Within that Christian context, right? So you have this spirit prison and paradise, and basically this is when everybody becomes Mormon, and Mormonism is educated into them because they're locked in the spirit prison until the second coming. And the second coming is going to be a really crazy and chaotic time in Mormonism. And
I can't even imagine.
Okay. So how deep do we want to go? Like, surface level, or are we going down to the mantle, or are we going down to the very core of this?
Let's keep it a little light right now, because we got lots to cover in this, and we can always do another deep dive later.
Okay.
We got Mormons in space. We got Bigfoot. You don't know what we've got.
Don't ask me, because you already know what I want, but what I want and what is right to do is probably two different things. So
fair. Okay. Well, so as a precursor to all, or this is all revealed in 1832, right? Like, this is only 2 years into Joseph Smith's ministry. This is in the early Kirtland era. The church is still like, it's still like grassroots and still very early on. It wasn't until later that Joseph Smith incorporated a lot of more expansive ideas into this, such as, God himself being a human, growing up as a human, and this eternal progression of God's growing up humans and then becoming gods and then creating humans on their own planets. That doesn't come along for another decade, basically into 1842, which is kind of where we dropped the last episode, was like in 1842, when he introduces the endowment ceremony, and all of this kind of comes together as a cohesive system of thought.
Super quick question before we go too far, because this is always something that's fascinated me and bothered me about the idea that you and your family become gods, and you grow up and do a universal, create your own universe. When does the family split off to form their own universes? Do you know what I mean? Aren't you still part of your dad's universe? Do you know where I'm going with that?
The answer to that is, you don't build your own universe. You operate within the confines of the new and everlasting that is our current universe, right? Like, it's the current cosmos as it is.
They get their own planet, but not their own universe per se.
Right. So the gods of Mormonism are eternal, right? And this is something that is really kind of hard to mesh together with the Big Bang, but you would just have to say that this kind of transcends the Big Bang, that there are laws and the gods, and that the gods can only operate within those parameters. Derek, looked like you were going to ask.
Yeah,
a question
you
on
broke out. The laws, something.
the laws and the parameters within the cosmos as it exists today are the only ways that gods can basically operate in Mormonism.
Gotcha.
You can't violate the laws of the universe as a god, or then you cease to be a god.
Gotcha.
We're all members of the same family. We're all members of this huge universal cosmological family, and we go on to make planets and achieve degrees of enlightenment that allow us to build worlds without end.
Gotcha. And to be clear, all these gods that preceded us were once in their time human beings like ourselves, who became
That's
good Mormons and created. So they just keep pushing it. It's gods all the way down.
I remember that being a huge problem when I was a fundamentalist, Protestant, because I used to jab Mormonism in because I'd be like, so you're telling me God was once a sinner, and it's like, he was once like me, like you, who was a sinner of his God. He sinned against his God on his planet, and he became God. He achieved divineship, and then we one day could potentially also be like our Father in heaven and have our own planet. And but maybe we're skipping ahead and getting into this doctrine that really starts off slowly, or is it already going like, is there a progression to this stuff?
So this slowly evolves, right? So the concept of men becoming gods, and it's men, it's only men. Women become priestesses or queens, but the job description of that is, making spirit babies. Yeah, you are a celestial broodmare. So let's go back to our little our plan of salvation here, right? Because this is all part of this idea that the most righteous men can ascend to become gods,
and that's most righteous white Mormon men, because everybody else will be at best a servant of those guys in heaven.
That's right. So we have answers in Mormonism for what happens to you when you die, right? So when you're in the spirit prison in paradise, that's when you learn about the gospel. But the problem is there are mortal ordinances that need to be conducted here on earth that people who are in the spirit prison were unable to accomplish during their mortal existence. So that's why Mormons do necromancy. They do baptisms for the dead, and they do endowments for the dead, these sealings. And these are basically ceremonies within the Mormon temples, not the Mormon churches. You see a lot of churches, the temples are a special thing in Mormonism. They're these white ivory massive towers, right? That's where they do the ordinances for the dead.
And there are thousands of Mormon churches, but there's only a couple dozen Mormon temples. Is that correct?
There's like 140 temples,
Gotcha.
worldwide. Where, you're right. There's like something, I would say like 10, 12,000 churches, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a disparity there. So in the temple is where you do these mortal ordinances. And the first time you go through the temple, you're doing your work for yourself. But every time that you go to temple session afterwards, you're doing it for dead people. You're doing ordinances for the dead. And this is why Mormon genealogy Mormonism is the largest genealogy institution in the world, because they're gathering names of people who need to be saved, which just so happens to produce the byproduct of them doing a lot of really good research. Right. Because it's their missionaries largely who are doing it.
Probably one of the finest things to come out of Mormonism, in my humble opinion, too. And yet, how bizarre, when you think about it for just 5 minutes, do they really think they've got everybody on a sheet somewhere doing genealogical research, that they're going to find every name? It's just, the whole steampunkiness of it fascinates me.
Right. This also requires a 6,000 year theology, right? Because you, when you're going back you're going back beyond a few thousand years, you don't have names, but there were people. There were definitely people. There have been people for, the peoples like you and me that we see for, a couple 100,000 years. We don't have any names or records of, right? You just got to make it up. What about our proto hominid ancestors, pre-homo sapien ancestors? Do they need their temple work done? Do we need to do temple work for the Neanderthals because we interbred with them?
I'm wondering
where does that end?
I wonder if somewhere down the line they're going to have another revelation and like, oh, here's how we find out the names of Grog the Neanderthal and Og the Cro-Magnon. I'm really curious to see how they're gonna square the circle on that. Yeah.
I don't know, because that would then allow them or require them to acknowledge that the world is more than 6,000 years, but the endowment ceremony and the theology doesn't allow for that. So I don't know. These are problems that I'm glad that I'm not like a prophet and have to try and figure out how to make sense with.
Yeah.
So with our diagram back here, when we look at what happens here and doing all these ordinances for dead people, right? This is just to allow them, once Judgment Day happens, to go to one of the 4 kingdoms. And it is 4 kingdoms. It really is.
3. Oh, I see where you're going with that.
Because outer darkness is essentially a kingdom, but there's what actually happens there is actually really fascinating. So anyway, the judgment happens, right? And the judgment is the second coming. The second coming catalyzes the next war in heaven, or it sets into a sequence, a chain of events that lead to the next war. So Jesus comes back.
How does Mormon eschatology differ from typical Protestant Christian eschatology?
Let me describe it, and then the two of you can help me kind of tease apart the differences, right? So there is the judgment day that happens, and for 1,000 years, Lucifer is bound and has no power, right? And Lucifer is an omnipresent force in Mormon theology. You stub your toe, well, that's because of Satan. You can't find your car keys, well, that's because of Satan. Right, like everything large and small is influenced or is somehow caused to some degree by Lucifer, and his angels, his spirits that are the third of the hosts of heaven that defected when Elohim chose Jesus's plan over Lucifer's plan. Right, so all of this happens when Jesus touches down in Jackson County, Missouri. And the second coming begins.
On Walnut
And
River Street, the corner. Yeah, anyway.
yeah, we know the exact coordinates actually where Jesus will touch down. It's really magnificent.
Yeah.
So when he touches down, here's a little more background, right? Mormon theology operates on the concept of keys, right? So we have the priesthoods, there's the Aaronic and the Melchizedek priesthood. But within each office of the church, you are given different keys. And the keys are, they're not physical. They aren't physical artifacts anymore. I think they used to be. But these keys are essentially what give you authority to exercise the priesthood.
They're sort of like
So
the spiritual equivalent of secret handshakes and code words.
sort of, it's more of like a bishop has keys. One of his keys is the power of discernment. A bishop can tell if you're lying or not.
Gotcha.
The prophet has certain keys. The apostles have different keys. So all of the keys of the priesthood authority are held by the prophet in this dispensation. So Russell M. Nelson, who's the prophet right now, he's 95. Let me check. No, he's not dead today, not yet. But each prophet holds the keys, and when the prophet dies, those keys are absorbed into the quorum of apostles until the next prophet is called at the next conference, where they give all of those keys back to the prophets. So the second coming happens, and all of the prophets from all of the dispensations will be immediately resurrected and brought to Adam-on-Diamond in, outside of Jackson County, Missouri, to the altar that Joseph apparently found there, right prior to the 1838 Mormon War in Missouri. Right.
Built by Adam and Eve after their expulsion from paradise.
Right. That's right. So all of these resurrected prophets, and we're talking the prophets of old, we're talking Abraham and Moses, and we're talking all the way up to Spencer Kimball and Russell Nelson, right? Like the prophets spanning all the thousands and thousands of years will all be resurrected immediately at that altar, where they will all confer their keys to the Savior, to Jesus, when he touches down.
Oh, it's exciting.
And this will bring about the 1,000 years of rest. The 1,000 years of rest is to get all of the ordinances done, because the veil separating the afterlife and the mortal life is rent. There is no veil. So now, instead of having to do research and looking in census records to find genealogical records to do people's temple ordinances, you just walk up to their spirit and ask. You say, hey, what's your name? Hey, when were you born? When did you die? Hey, write that down on this paper. I'm going to go get dunked for you. And you got a body. Yay. You're resurrected. Right. So you got this 1,000-year probation period where all of the temple work, all the mortal work is done. And that basically declares the factions in the coming war. So there is the resurrection that happens at this time, the final judgment, and this massive war in heaven that is going to be waged on earth when Satan is loosed after the 1,000-year probation.
But wait, we've got this 1,000 years of hunky-dory feel-goodness of people doing Mormonism. Who are they going to be fighting against?
That's Satan and his legion, right? So there are still going to be people who reject Mormon theology and reject the gospel while they are in spirit prison, and they will go join the legion of Lucifer's followers in outer darkness, and they don't get their body back because they're in outer darkness.
Oh, that's so sad.
It's a bummer. It really is a bummer. And hey, that's where I'm headed.
Why would anyone reject Mormonism, Bryce? I don't understand.
I don't know. It's such a great theology. It's all about families.
Yeah.
Right. So this war happens, and of course Jesus is going to reign supreme, and that's when the final declaration, the final judgment occurs, and that's when you are declared to go to one of the kingdoms. And this is where Mormonism has answers that a lot of Christian theologies don't. What happens to Hitler? Well, he goes right here, or if he accepts the gospel while he is in spirit prison because he was a bad boy, he can get to the celestial kingdom because his ordinances have been done for him on the earth.
Fun fact, he has actually been baptized for the dead for Adolf Hitler. So that's special. Yeah.
So Hitler can go to the celestial kingdom. And eventually, if he's righteous enough, he can become a god of his own planet. Oh, how great would that planet be? But this is also interesting too, because it all hinges on whether or not you accept the gospel, right? So we have these different degrees. We have the telestial, that's the kingdom of the stars, the terrestrial, the kingdom of the moon, and the celestial, the kingdom of the sun. And I understand.
Based on this, Bryce, it's almost like we have a Hitler for a god for this planet right now.
Oh,
You notice that? Dude, someone baptized for the god of this planet. That's why things are crazy right now here. Dude, you just answered the biggest enigma I've ever heard. Oh my gosh.
I told you Mormonism has an answer where all other Christianities fail. Every time Mormons got an answer. Right. So it's all hinges on your belief in the gospel, right? You can be the most bastard, grifter, genocidal piece of waste and make it to the celestial kingdom because you say that I believe in the gospel, and you have all your work done for you on earth.
And to be fair, you do have a lot of celestial hoops to jump through to get to that level.
That's true. You do. Absolutely. Right. But there's also the people who are like generally good people, who may never choose to believe in it. And the best that they can get to is the telestial kingdom, the lowest kingdom.
Yeah.
So your nice neighbor down the street who's like, who's an atheist, he's going to go to the telestial kingdom. But Hitler, if he accepts the gospel, goes to become a god.
It sounds very Pauline, but also a blend of what we talked about with purgatory, and then how the church, utilized the idea of, we'll pray for their spirit in the to help it move on, to purge it of its sin in purgatory so that they could go on into heaven. But this adds dimensions. This makes it more exciting. What man?
Dragons level. Looks,
yes.
Like
what man wouldn't want to be a god of his own planet with plenty of women, popping out spirit babies for him, which is, it also tells you, it kind of frames the setting. And like 100 years from now, we're going to look back and go, yeah, that was definitely written in the 19th century. Like, it's so obvious that the way we roll as male and female roles in the world, like, she's just a product of production. I mean, yeah, that happens in the Middle East with, medieval ideologies, but it's like obvious this is not something that was thinking about 100 years from now or 200 years from now.
It's fascinating how similar every fundamentalist religion, regardless of what the actual religion is, every fundamentalist movement shares all these traits, like authoritarianism, like sexism, like racism. They just fall into these same patterns of, oh, here's the chosen people. It's straight white men. Boom, they're the top dog, and everybody else is just, there to serve them and don't really count.
Right. And that should also be pointed out, right? Like the people who go to the celestial kingdom, they have all of the freedoms and liberties to visit the people in the other lower kingdoms, right? So you can go down the scale, but nobody that's lower can go up the scale. So if you are in the celestial kingdom and say your kid leaves the church and they end up going to the telestial kingdom instead, you can go down and visit your kid in that hell, basically, but they can't come up to visit you in the celestial kingdom.
They can just hear how nice it is from you. It's like, oh, gotta go.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I don't feel comfortable here. Oh, this place isn't holy enough for me and my righteousness and delight.
I'm going to go hang out with Jesus and Moses. See ya.
It also sounds very Greco-Roman mythology, like Hercules going down to Hades to try and take Cerberus, the three-headed beast dog. Like he can go into those dimensions, but nobody can leave Hades, so to speak, to go up. That's weird.
Yeah, but it requires like a demigod to be able to move between those planes of existence, right? And it should also be noted that the members of the Godhead, and Mormonism has this Godhead. We have God the Father, who is Elohim. We have Jehovah, Jesus, who is possibly Michael, who is possibly, the Archangel Michael. And we have the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit, each of these three gods are members of the Godhead. and they preside over the various realms, right? So God presides over the celestial, Jesus presides over the terrestrial, the Holy Spirit presides over the telestial kingdom. So if you are a sinner in your life and you reject Mormonism, you get to hang out with just the Holy Spirit for eternity.
I have a problem. This is something I have
This is
to
the
ask.
first time. This is your first red flag.
This is the first time.
Okay.
This has got to be.
All right.
Not really, but this is definitely one that I'm seeing. It's a huge red flag, because when you approach a Mormon that's open about this, especially in the older clips, they have clips on YouTube where real Mormons are answering, say, yes, our father was once a man who became a god, and you will too if you believe blah, blah, blah. That's pretty much why he's standing in line in a Mormon temple or a Mormon church. It's obvious. The guy's like, dude, I'm getting my ticket to be a god. Here's the problem I have. You just mentioned these three gods of the Godhead, not one God, Trinity, three gods, triune membership of gods, plural, polytheism, or Heneth, that's polytheism. There ain't no playing games there. They're ruling these certain kingdoms or dimensions, if you will. What's weird about that is if you go on to become a god, do you now rule this dimension, or are these the three gods that have always ruled these three dimensions since, I mean, like, when were these kingdoms and dimensions created? Like, by these only three gods? And you see how freaking screwed up, because what you have is you have that argument, the schoolboy argument. Oh, God created the world, right? Theists do this all the time. Well, who created God? Well, nobody created God. God's eternal. Okay, what about all these kingdoms? Who rules these things? If there was a God before him, why are they in charge of these kingdoms? Was the kingdoms or these dimensions handed over to these gods? And then when you die, you will get another terrestrial, celestial, outer darkness key handed to you, whatever, where you now rule that? I mean, do they have a place?
That's kind of my question earlier. Just once these guys go up to the celestial kingdom and become gods in their own right, super gods in their own right, do their new planets fall under the celestial kingdom, or are they going off in some new, big bang of their own?
Okay, so they're kind of
let's not think it out that far.
There's just a lot of strings to kind of pull on here to try and answer all of those within a consistent theology. Gotcha. And trust me, Mormon theology is very internally consistent. There's only a few rabbit holes that you'll get to the end of, and the answer will be, we have to wait until we're dead to answer that question, to ask that, right? But by and large, this is a very consistent and logical theology, which is, and for some reasons, is why it appeals to a lot of very educated people, and why it cultivates an educated populace. So, to try and answer these questions, right? These realms are the realms of the gods. These are the celestial, the realms of heaven, and they don't exist as like individual subsets. They exist as these universal planes of existence that can be, you can jump around these different planes, these different kingdoms. But they're essentially the planes of existence where all of these things exist that are not visible. They are not accessible to mortals, because we live in the mortal existence, right? And people, there's claims that the kingdoms, after all these things
there's
happen,
claims
that the earth will become one of these kingdoms. Like it'll be transformed into the celestial kingdom, or it will be the telestial kingdom, or whatever the case is. But there's a lot of these answers are kind of squishy, right? But the premortal existence is where the council of gods exist and create the babies, right? These council of gods, these are all members of the celestial kingdom. They all have achieved celestial glory through their mortal existence, and they are granted the status of godhood and given the keys, the priesthood keys, to organize matter into planets.
So you're saying in our chart, really the primordial existence and the celestial kingdom are the same thing? It's all one circle?
No, not necessarily, right? So the premortal existence is basically a holding place, and the premortal existence may be planet specific or God specific, where it's like this specific God and his wives created all of the beings that exist in like this individual premortal existence, like lockers at the bus station or something, right? But it could also be a matter of like the premortal existence is shared. It shares some tendencies with one of the kingdoms, and you just can't achieve status of having a resurrected body in those kingdoms of glory, these three glories, until you pass through the veil and get your body by coming to earth, right? So what differentiates the spirits from the resurrected beings is mortal existence. Premortal existence is all the spirits.
I gotta ask you, I hate this. We gotta jab in. I have to ask though. And I know you're like trying to get to something, but this brings up more questions. One problem that I have here is it sounds like all of these existences, whether it be the celestial, terrestrial, or even the pre-existence, right? It's almost like all these realms exist longer than the gods themselves because they are eternal. What's not eternal are the gods themselves. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what it sounds like is only for this existence here on this particular planet is Jesus, his father, and Satan role players in this story of this only little small section. Who knows? There might be better stories out there with other guys with different names somewhere, because before them, what story was there before them? What story of a God who had their planet? I mean, what if Yahweh, let's just play the game and say that's the father.
Yeah.
Yahweh was a pre-existent human who came to his own planet, and the trinity of his particular dimension was something else. So now what you have is God is really the existence of all these things. And when it talks about the eternal idea that there's no created divine being, really these existences are what's eternal, and what's not really eternal, so to speak, is God's, because they are created or developed. Now they last eternally, but they are not self-existent in the pre-existent past forever, unless they think in their theology Jesus the Father and the Holy Spirit are self-existent, eternal as divine beings forever. But then what the heck, why are you saying he was once a man? It doesn't,
Right.
That's where the loophole I think is a huge problem.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but don't they cover that by saying this is the God that we have any dealings with, and these are the things, this is our universe, we don't know what happened before, we don't know what's going to happen after those.
So it's a big question, like, who knows?
Not necessarily, right?
No?
This conversation would probably be better understood if we contextualize everything as cosmological energies. So energies exist infinitely, right? And even the Big Bang itself was the collection, the singularity of energy that expanded. Whatever existed before that was it was the creation of the council of gods, the council of these celestial energies that transcend just the cosmology itself, right? So there is the council of gods that transcends all of the universal existence. And is there a God above the council of gods? Is there a president God? Well, we don't know the answer to that question, but there is the council of gods that everybody opts into participating in, which is celestial resurrected beings. So everything is cosmological energy. Gods don't have the power to create matter. They have the power to organize that matter. And they organize that matter into a bookcase or into a spirit baby, depending on what that God wants for that matter to be.
I would be willing to bet serious money that that is a modern Mormon interpretation of Einsteinian physics that Joseph Smith would never have dreamed of, I suspect.
Well,
because
okay,
that is almost like Hinduism.
This comes back to Brigham Young more than Joseph Smith, right? Joseph Smith was able to lay the blueprints, but Brigham Young, along with Orson Pratt, who was a theologian, one of the church's only real theologians, they were able to argue in the Deseret News and in the various church periodicals what these various theological arguments actually mean, and how to interpret the blueprints that Joseph Smith laid out for them to build their theology, right? So a lot of this does come down to Brigham Young and Orson Pratt.
Yeah.
But these celestial energies, and this is what Orson Pratt talked a lot about in Utah, was that these energies are organized, and that they are that they realize their full potential when they are inhabited in a physical body that achieves the celestial glory and is able to go on and achieve godhood and create worlds without end. Right. But there are other matter, there is other matter and other material that exists in the universe that is available for other gods once they ascend to organize into their own planets, right? And this organization of planets is also how Mormons get around the archaeology problem, right? If the Earth is 6,000 years old, then where do all the dinosaur bones come from? Well, it turns out that all the dinosaur bones were just floating around in the space, and then God organized them all together into the Earth and just decided to put them where they are to test our faith, right?
Brilliant.
Yeah. Mormon theology includes dinosaur bones floating around in space. I digress.
Oh,
so within the context of this, right, there's also the so that you have the 3 degrees of glory: the telestial, the lowest; the terrestrial, the highest; the celestial, the highest. Sorry, terrestrial is the middle, celestial is the highest. Within the celestial kingdom, there are 3 degrees of it, and these Mormons very rarely talk about the 3 degrees within the celestial kingdom, right? And when this concepts were formed was when Joseph Smith was a master mason, right? This is the 33rd degree of Mormon heaven, the 3rd level of the 3rd level, the highest level of the celestial kingdom. That's where you become a god. The celestial kingdom includes degrees of ascendancy. When you are resurrected into the celestial kingdom, you don't automatically go and start making planets. You have to achieve degrees of intelligence and enlightenment that allow you to basically rise through the ranks of the celestial kingdom that will allow you to eventually become a god and organize your own planets with all of your wives, right? Which means that the people who are in the lower degrees of the celestial kingdom, the bottom 2/3 here, they become essentially servants or slaves to those who are at the highest level of the celestial kingdom, which is interesting because those in the celestial kingdom are served by those in the lower kingdoms as well. So like the bottom 2/3 are all of the celestial kingdom. These 2 kingdoms are their slaves, but the celestial kingdom, the highest crust, the lower 2 kingdoms are their slaves, right? This is the 33rd degree of Mormon theology.
and again, it just also begs another question for me. It's like, I totally see as a selling point that, oh yes, and all these people will be your slaves. But in fact, what can they do since they can't go up to the celestial kingdom and do celestial kingdom things? I don't know if they have an answer for that.
Hey, somebody has to like carry all that matter around space and put it where you tell them to put it somehow, right?
I guess.
These roles aren't very well defined because we're talking about the heaven and hell of Mormonism, which is like it's already a really squishy topic, and we don't have so much material on it. We just have a little bit of material that Joseph left behind, and then we have the theologians who followed him, building on that, trying to divine the tea leaves of what was Joseph really thinking at this time, and also. We have outer darkness. Outer darkness is an interesting prospect because outer darkness is only for the people who had a sure witness of the Savior, which means that they essentially saw Jesus or that they had a true knowledge of the Savior, and they deny him.
Yeesh. Like us. Like all 3 of us. Yeah.
But then there's always the getaway of like, well, I never actually saw Jesus in person, so I don't actually qualify for outer darkness because I never had a sure witness, right? But those who have a sure witness and who deny it, they go to outer darkness. And outer darkness is there's a lot of disagreement about what actually constitutes outer darkness, but it's essentially the absence of light, which Christians say that's hell is the absence of the grace of Jesus, right? Mormons say the same thing, but the absence of light, generally speaking. Yeah. Because the telestial is the light of the stars, the terrestrial is the light of the moon, the celestial is the light of the sun, which astronomically speaking doesn't make sense because a bunch of stars are a lot brighter than the sun, and the moon doesn't emit any of its own light.
But what's interesting about that is looking at the fact from your own perception in the 1830s, 40s, you're going to see these lights and you're going to think, whoa, but here's another interesting thing that might play into the skin color right here is that light brighter is better. And therefore the reflection of your skin is really a significance of cleanliness, of you being more pure. And therefore it all builds into their whole thing. So I think that's silly, obviously, but this is why we need to know science. This is why we really need to learn a little bit about really what's going on with the anthropology and the development of man, evolution, things like that. But this is crazy. I could see why light and brightness is better, and there you're white and delightful and all that kind of stuff builds into this. But this, very interesting.
And there's two quick things I want to say just to build on this. The idea of stars and planets, when you read what things like Brigham Young was saying, it's obvious that they didn't really have a firm idea what stars and planets were and how they were different, and that they weren't the same thing. And that gets really interesting, as we'll see later on. And just about the white and delightsome thing, it's fascinating to me that the ancient Greeks, they were racist too in their own way, but they were like, clearly the Mediterranean people are the best because we're just right. Those pale barbarians, the Germanians, you know, they're these anemic little skinny things that they talk bar, that's all they speak. And the Africans were clearly too much sun and they get blackened, you know, whereas this middle bit is just right. So it's so fascinating to see how all these cultures can make whatever they are the number one.
This is right. So it's weird. It's like the high society is like the most approved of. It's like the best, right? Like this is all part of I'm trying to remember what's Andrew Jackson's wife. What was her name?
No idea.
What the hell was her? Anyway, well, anyway, so Andrew Jackson was, you know, he was a general. He was a rough and tumble. He was a scrapper. He was part of low society, and he was basically the first president who was, who came from the rags and got to the riches, and was appointed or achieved election as a populist, militaristic president, right? And we see the effects of that, or the Indian Removal Act, and a bunch of horrible, horrible things in American history. But one of the slights that was used against Andrew Jackson's wife was that she was tan. Because the people who were tan, that means that they weren't rich enough and wealthy enough to hire work. That they had to go out and work their own fields and go and work their own gardens and stuff, right? So it's very Victorian and antebellum period America, that the more white and delightsome you are, obviously the more wealthy you are, because you never have to go outside and have the sun beat on you, because you're wealthy enough to afford people who do all of the work for you.
Very English aristocracy idea too.
Very much so. Right. Exactly.
Anemic pale lordlings, it's like, oh, that's the thing to go for. They clearly don't have, they can wear ties. They don't have to do manual labor, Yeah.
Exactly. And so that idea, that caste system, that hierarchy, and that religious and racial supremacy is built into the very fabric of Mormonism, right? So it's not accurate to say that Mormonism is racist. It is accurate to say Mormonism is white supremacist, right? And that is built into the fabric itself. Until Mormonism disavows all of its holy books, until it goes away from this system of theology and just becomes kind of mainstream Christianity, it will never cease to be a white supremacist religion. It just is. That you can't disentangle that from the modern day church, because that's the foundations of it. The foundations itself are bigot.
I actually have to say 100% on the same side. Like, mainstream Christianity took a smart move in the way that they've approached things today. They've divorced themselves as much as they can from certain things that are racially tenuous. Even now, we are starting to see even churches like the Catholic Church beginning to get on board with LGBT community, the LGBTQ communities, and same-sex marriage, and women being preachers, and the whole thing. So they're taking a step that they know is going to either destroy them if they hold on any longer. And I think Mormonism needs the same kind of action to take place. They need to reform their thinking. Look, if you want to think these things, and I would say they're irrational, and I think that they're lacking any evidence to try and believe these types of things, I'm not trying to be derogatory, go for it. But it's not going to work in society, because we get back to the moral question. Where do morals come from? Well, society creates those. And so get ready. Let's see how strong your divine morals stand up in 100 to 200 years from now, when people discover the evidence that Bryce and David are presenting here about your theology,
Or even just something as simple as extramarital sex. That's becoming a huge issue for religious leaders too.
Wow.
Yeah.
I heard about something like that in North Carolina. Actually, this 30 minutes from me, there's a school where one of the guys, I think is the president, if I'm not mistaken, supposedly, I don't know if it's true or not because I don't get involved, but supposedly got caught doing things.
Are we
Huh?
talking about Falwell? Are we talking about Falwell Jr.?
Campbell University?
Oh no, I'm thinking of Liberty University.
Okay. Oh, it might be Liberty. It might be Liberty.
Some other sex scandal and some other Christian higher institute of learning.
I could be wrong. It's who knows.
Right.
Yeah.
So okay, so let's I want to use that as kind of the jump off point to talk about polygamy and all of this as well, right? Because there are a lot of Christian leaders who have been caught in sex scandals. And it's one of those things, like Jerry Falwell, who, he was just, it seems like he was just in a triad with his wife and the pool boy, right? And cool, if that's what you want, then that's super cool. But don't make it a part of your daily life to decry people who do that stuff and then do it yourself, right? I don't have a problem with people doing that. I have a problem when people are hypocrites and people are lying, right? Yeah. So when it comes to Mormon sex and relationship practices, obviously, a huge part of this system of theology is polygamy. In order to get to the highest degree of the kingdom, of the celestial kingdom, you have to have multiple wives. It is impossible to populate your planets without multiple wives. It can't be done. It just cannot be done. And Orson Pratt argued extensively that the gestation period for spiritual beings, or for ascended celestial beings, is obviously less than it is for human mortal existence, because in order to populate an entire planet with millions of people, one would have to have millions of wives over millions of years. But if the gestation period itself is simply half that of a mortal mother, then you could populate 1 million people with 500,000 wives in a year, right? Orson Pratt talked about this a lot in his, I think his periodical was like The Seer, or I think it was The Seer. It ran for a few years, and he talked extensively about this stuff.
Dude, before we get, this is so important, I have to ask, because we're getting up to the hour, okay? And we're going to deep dive into some crazy, you don't want to miss this next episode. I'm telling you, we got to stick a needle in here soon, Bryce, because I know you're about to unload on them some Jerry Springer stuff, like trailer park stuff's going on.
That's
okay?
right. That's right.
I want to ask about one theological point, and I know we're not hitting all of it, so you're going to have to check out his podcast. You're going to have to check out David's book. You guys are going to have to plug into these guys to find out more. I know it's such a cliffhanger. It's like $10 crack rock, and you've never tried it. Now you want to come back for more. That's the purpose of this show, is to get you guys to get hooked, to want to know more about this. The sons of God marry daughters of men. Okay. Here you have divine beings sleeping with human women, male, humans, and there's divine versus human nature. Here they're having giants. Now you got these corrupt beings. What do the Mormons do with that? Do you have an idea what they do with that particular doctrine there in Genesis 6?
Okay, so all right. There are giants in the Book of Mormon. This is all part of this more esoteric Christianity, right? That has been largely lost to American Christianity, which is such a bummer, because if I had a preacher talking about giants and aliens and stuff like that, like I would listen to those sermons regardless. Mormonism, in Mormon theology, this was something that was teased by Joseph Smith, but it was also greatly expanded by Brigham Young, and that's the Adam God theory. That Adam was God, Elohim, the God, right? The God that created earth and it created Jesus and Lucifer and so on and so forth. And that this God, Adam God, brought down one of his wives who was the primordial human goddess, which was Eve. She was one of his celestial wives that he gave the designation of Eve as the first female, the first woman human being on the planet. So that God decided to utilize his mortal abilities to come down to earth, to his own creation, and populate it with his own babies, and we are all descended from them, right? And the thing is too, like, right, there's this infinite regression, right? Because God grew up on the planet nearest the star Kolob, right? God has a belly button and God farts, right? Like God is a human being. And he went through all of the ranks. He did all the handshakes. He did all the good Mormon stuff to be a good Mormon boy growing up. And he married multiple wives on the planet nearest the star Kolob. And then he died and he was resurrected to the highest degree of the celestial kingdom. And he made earth. He made earth for us. And he made all of the spirit babies that inhabit all of the bodies, all these meat sacks that we walk around in, right? In order to physically populate the planet, not only did he create the spiritual babies with his wives in the premortal existence, he came down to his creation with one of his wives and began the physical mortal creation on earth. That all humans are descended from a physical set of gods, from a heavenly mother and father. And that is the Adam God doctrine, essentially encapsulated in 2 minutes.
What do they say about I don't know if you have a thought on this, maybe we need to dig and find out what some of the scholars in the Mormon cult have to say, but the sons of God, what happens is once they have these children, it appears in the context that God, Adam God, is angry at creation, at mankind, after these sons of God sleep with daughters of men, and they have these Nephilim, these giants that are produced, and obviously the human race is now being very corrupted. So he's like, screw these guys. I don't know why I made you to begin with. I should just destroy you. Do they have an explanation for that, or like that you know of? I'm sure they have one, but I didn't know if you have if you're aware of it or not.
I'm sure it exists.
You'd have to look it up.
One thing is, I will say, my understanding of Mormon theology mostly stems from my time growing up in it, because this is what you're taught in Sunday school. Almost everything that I've learned about Mormonism since leaving the church at age 16 has been all about the history. And the history and the theology are, they intersect, but you can study them as separate and distinct things. I am not a Mormon theologian. Right. I do not spend my time reading people's blog posts and our articles in Interpreter and the various theological symposia and journals in this, because frankly, it doesn't matter. I don't care. It's fun. It's interesting. It's wacky. It's crazy to talk about, as God is, we can, or no, sorry, as we are, God once was, as God is, we may someday become. That's the couplet that Orson Pratt coined. This is fun. It's fun, crazy, wacky, delightful, and hilarious. But at the end of the day, there's nothing to it. Whereas the history itself, there's so much to the history. So that's what I study. But I obviously have to be conversant with the theology itself in order to understand some of the aspects of the history and to understand, why things happen the way they did or where things kind of slot in together. But that by no means makes me a Mormon theologian.
Respect.
So I'm sure there are answers to those questions, but I don't have them. I'm sure they're out there.
And I do love Mormon theology, but only in my subset is wacky Mormon theology, the wacky weirdness of it.
Which is to say all Mormon theology.
Yeah.
But I will say, one of my favorite things about Mormon theology is outer darkness, and this is one reason why I like it is because like I'm probably going there, right? So I want to pay attention to where I'm going. But this is where the concept of Mormon reincarnation comes into play. Because the outer darkness isn't just necessarily an absence of light, an absence of the existence of God. It is where you are also punished, right? You undergo the punishment. I'll also say everything that we've talked about today is the modern interpretation. It's slightly different from Joseph Smith's version of these heavens. Joseph Smith said unequivocally the telestial kingdom is hell, that's where the weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth happens. But in more modern Mormon theology, outer darkness is where that's hell. But what happens in outer darkness is really interesting, because sometime after your punishment, you undergo, or maybe this is part of the punishment, you undergo a dissolution. Your organized matter, you have rejected the God that created you and that organized your matter. You aren't fit to be part of that matter altogether. Your matter is essentially dissolved, which allows you to go elsewhere in the cosmos and to be organized by a different God. So God, yeah. The greatest punishment that you can receive is basically a recycling of your celestial energies, and then you will be reorganized on a place that can properly deal with how sinful you are, which is, it feels like God sends you to like the Australia planet or something. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like.
Australia, you do. Well, I gotta say, just on a purely theological bullshit level, that flavor of bullshit is more interesting than an eternal barbecue with demons.
Isn't it though? Yeah, right, because you get a chance, you get another stab at existence and trying to ascend to godhood. It's an infinite journey of ascendancy and intelligence and learning the mysteries and the natures of all existence, not just physical, real existence that I can reach out and touch somebody, but the existence that transcends the physical existence, which
I
in
like
many
the
ways,
concepts of universalism. I like things
right,
like that.
Right. Well, and that also appeals to the people who are not content with, standard garden variety Christianity. You want something more. You want to learn about something more. You want to incorporate esoteric thoughts and philosophies into your theology. Do you want a theology that also incorporates numerology and astrology and a bunch of other ologies that are, debunked pseudoscience? You want a theology with all of those incorporated into one? Mormonism is your religion. And guess what? No matter how deep you dig, you're only scratching the surface, because you will never be as smart as a god to truly understand these things.
Until you are one.
Until you are one.
Yeah, exactly.
So you better pay your tithing.
Wow. David, do you have anything you'd like to say before we go to the polygamy?
Note to end this chapter and just say that we didn't even get to any of the other things that I thought we'd be getting into this episode. So there's so much more crazy wackiness, wigginess. But here's the thing that fascinates me is, why is it that religious people, by and large, reject evolution when every single religion out there is such a perfect class book example of evolution in action?
Tell
me where I got to start.
Yeah, why does every religious person?
All right. The thing that a show like this keeps bringing home to me is that, why is it that religious people, by and large, reject evolution when every single religion out there is just a classic textbook example of evolution in action?
Because religious people don't study comparative religions.
Bingo.
That absolutely needs to be part of Common Core instruction, comparative religious studies. Yeah, I think that would do a lot to advance society.
I do, because the more you learn about somebody else's religion, the harder it is to take any of them seriously, including your own.
That's what happened to me. That's
that
exactly
was
what
my
happened
own deconversion experience, right? I
Yep.
watched the South Park episode about the Mormons and I was like, ha ha ha, South Park being South Park. And then I watched the Scientology episode and they go through Xenu and the DC-10s and like they print at the bottom of the screen, this is what Scientologists actually believe. And that caused me to think about back on the Mormon episode and be like, oh crap.
I remember,
Oh no.
I remember the moment I was in a theological argument with a girl I was hitting up on, and making that realization, like, holy crap, I'm just like the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm just parroting what I was taught.
Exactly.
Well, dum 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 dum. Ladies and
Aren't we
gentlemen,
all?
we are at the end of this hour. It was a little extra time on this episode. We didn't get to cover stuff like Men on the Moon and just so many ideas that are out there. Maybe we'll touch on it throughout episodes toward the end. Let us know what you think about this amazing doctrine and church and religion. And anyway, I really do appreciate it. Guys, go down in the description. As you know, I've mentioned at the beginning and somewhat towards the end, check out their Patreons. Help these guys out. Join, do whatever you can to help them keep doing what they're doing. And you can help us do what we're doing here at MythVision. I really do appreciate all the comments, the likes, all that kind of stuff. Share this out there. Get this known. Let others people get involved in this series. And I really do appreciate that. Thank you guys for joining me on this episode.
Always.
Thank you. That was a lot of fun.
It really was.
More fun to come.
If you guys think this is fun, get ready for the relationship stuff and all that good stuff. It's about to get real juicy. And don't forget, we are MythVision.